Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Dinda Nurmutiara and my friend is Ayu Shefa. We are from Group 4. We'll present material about linguistics, poetics, and the bipolarity of literary language by presenting the theory of Roman Jakobson. First, I will explain a little about Roman Jakobson. Linguistics plays an important role in making literary criticism of the 20th century more visible. One of the key important figures who developed literary criticism based on the linguistic insight was Roman Jakobson. The work of Roman Jakobson occupies a central and seminal place in the development of formalism and structuralism. Essentially a linguist, Jakobson was born in Moscow, where he co-founded the Moscow Linguistic Circle in 1915, which also include Osip Brick and Boris Tomaszewski, along with Viktor Shklovsky and Boris Eichenbaum. He was also involved in a second Russian formalist group, the Society for the Study of Poetic Language, or OPOYAS, formed in 1916. The formalists were in some ways precursor of structuralism. In 1926, Jakobson founded the Prague Linguistic Circle, which engaged critically with the work of Saussure. And fleeing from Nazi occupation, he moved to America in 1941, where he became acquainted with Claude Lévi-Strauss. In 1913, he co-founded the Linguistic Circle of New York. His ideas proved to be a greatest impact first in France and then in America. The following is a reprint of Roman Jakobson's essay, The Metamorphic and Metonymic Poles, in 1956, explains the tangle of connection that exists between psychological linguistic and literary criticism. In both domains, Jakobson was an important figure. He was a key figure in the formation of the Russian formalist movement and later the Prague School of Linguistics, both of which deal with literary that is fundamentally definable in the same way that language is. Next on the first discussion is describe the aphasia in linguistic context. Aphasia is a language disorder. The structural linguist Roman Jakobson made the discovery that aphasia, which describes a variety of problems with verbal expression, usually caused by brain damage, tend to involve one of two types of linguistic deficiency. Jakobson's discovery was that aphasia victims tend to have a language deficiency that corresponds to one or other of the two excess. So he called the deficiency respectively the similarity disorder and contiguity disorder. The former affliction involves a deterioration of metalinguistic operation, while the latter damage the capacity for maintaining the hierarchy of linguistic units. The relation of similarity is suppressed in the former, the relation of contiguity in the latter type of aphasia. Jakobson's paper is a good example of the ways in which damaged faculties can illuminate the actual functioning of the faculty itself. It's one of the situations where you need something to go wrong before you really understand how it properly works. In a well-known psychological test, children are confronted with some noun and told to utter the first verbal response that comes into their head. In this experiment to opposite linguistic prediction are invariable exhibit that the response is instead either as a substitute for or as a complement to the stimulus. In the latter case, the stimulus and the response together form a proper syntactic construction, most usually a sentence. These two types of reaction have been labeled substitutive and predictive. Second discussion is describe the aphasia in poetic context. One of the most influential aspects of Jakobson's paper is his development of the wider implication of the two types of aphasia. As we have already seen, the two deficiencies imply the research to two different types of figurative language, metaphor and metonymy. In general, Jacobson holds that poetry is focused upon the sign and is based on the principle of similarity. Thus, poetry in general leans toward metaphor. Prose, on the other hand, is focused primarily upon the referent and is based on contiguity, hence its underlying strategy is metonymy. The situation has been explored effectively in art criticism and literary theory. The primacy of metaphoric process in the literary schools of Romanticism and Symbolicism has been repeatedly acknowledged, but it still insufficiently realized that it is the predominance of metonymy which underlies and actually predetermines the so-called realistic trend, which belongs to an intermediary stage between the decline of Romanticism and the rise of Symbolicism and is opposed to both. Following the path of contiguous relationship, the realistic author metonymically digresses from the plot of the atmosphere and from the character to the setting in space and time. It's generally realized that Romanticism is closely linked with metaphor, whereas the equally intimate ties of realism with metonymy usually remain unnoticed. Since poetry is focused upon sign and pragmatic prose primarily upon referent, tropes and figures were studied mainly as poetical devices. The principle of similarity underlies poetry, the metrical parallelism of lines or the phonic equivalence of rhyming words from the question of semantic similarity and contrast. There exists, for instance, grammatical and anti-grammatical. Third discussion is what is the difference between metaphoric and metonymic in relation to aphasic disturbance. The metaphoric and metonymic poems were written by Roman Jacobson. He discussed the relationship between metaphor, metonym, and two polar types of aphasia. He urges that the development of any discourse occurs along two different semantic lines. One is metaphorical, where one topic leads to another through similarity or substitution. The other is metonymic, where one topic suggests another through contiguity. Two polar types of aphasia. Similarity disorder. Metaphor is alien to the similarity disorder. Contiguity disorder. Metonymy is alien to the contiguity disorder. In normal verbal behavior, both processes are consistently operating, but careful observation will reveal that under the influence of cultural patterns, personality, and verbal style, preference is given to one of the processes over the other. Stimulus, substitution of complement are responses that are highlighted when confronted by something called predication. For example, children are confronted with a hat and told to utter the first verbal response that goes into their heads once response was burned out. The other was a poor little house. Both reactions are predicative, but the former creates a purely narrative context, while in the latter there is a dual relation to the subject of the hat. On the one hand, a position, proximity, and on the other hand, a semantic similarity. The same stimulus produces a substitutive reaction, namely, according to tautology, hats are synonymous with cabins and hats are antonyms with palace, and the metaphor is nest and burrow. The capacity of the words to substitute for one another is derived from positional similarity and addition. All these responses are related to the stimulus by semantic similarity or contrast. Since aphasia with defects in substitution will not be able to compare the name of the object to which is pointed, the metonymic response to the same stimulus, such as high, garbage, or property, is to combine and contrast positional similarity with semantic closeness. In manipulating the two types of connection, similarity and proximity, in their two aspects, positioning and semantic, selecting, combining, and ranking them in individual demonstratives his personal style, verbal preference, and preference. The next material will explained by my friend is Ayu Shiva.
Okay, and the next material will be read by me about why does metaphoric relate to portrait. And metaphoric can relate to portrait because it has two elements of verbal interaction that are very prominent, and metaphoric has one topic that leads to another topic that has similarities or substitution. And while in portrait, the focus is on a second based on the principle of similarity. Portrait is focused on second, and in general, portrait tend to be metaphorical. And the meaning of this explanation is that metaphor themselves can relate to portrait. This is that there are two elements that stand out because they are interconnected in the pattern of portrait, and which requires mandatory parallelism between adjacent lines. And not only that, in page 18.4 of the book, Jacobson also suggests that in portrait, one must focus on sequence and based on the principle of similarity, and so that portrait in general tend to be metaphorical. And the next material is why does metonymic relate to prose. And metonymic, which is having one topic suggestion and another topic through closeness related to space, time, as well as psychological association, but on the prose itself that is focusing primarily on a reference based on proximity to having the underlying strategy is metonymy itself. And likewise, the primacy of the metaphorical process is very influential on Romanticism literature, and symbolism has been repeatedly acknowledged, but it is still less recognized that the dominance of metonymy, which underlies and actually determines the so-called realistic trend, belong to the intermediate stage and can be summed up as metonymy. One topic suggests another through proximity, and prose based on proximity, so that the connection points are in proximity, therefore can be like prose underlying strategies is metonymy, aka underlying prose is metonymy. And the reason why metonymy is related to prose work is that is seen from its own prose side, where prose is free from the rules and priorities the beauty side, so that it is related to metonym, which expresses meaning by giving another word whose meaning is still the same. So this is so related to prose work because it varieties of the word as a form of beauty. Okay, and last, the material is how can you distinguish linguistic and poetic. And his paper, Linguistic and Poetic 1958, Jacobson argues that since poetic concern the artistic feature of a verbal message, and linguistic is the global science of verbal structure, and poetic is an integral part of linguistics. And his point here is poetic elements belong to the science of language as a whole, in that they belong to the yet broader field or semiotic or theory of sequence, and since they are not confined to verbal art. And the difference between linguistic and poetry is actually a slight difference, because poetry is integrally related to linguistic, in the sense that their relationship is continuous, always related. And so the elements that make up a poem are also related to the linguistic structure linguistically. And the sense that linguistics has an important role and portray cannot be without linguistic. And so the way to tell the difference is the linguistic is the head, portray it is branch. Linguistic is the comprehensive, most powerful linguistic structure, and while poetry is a message or sequence that is formed as a result of the linguistic health or role. Okay guys, that's the presentation material of group 4, and with the material about linguistic, poetic, and language before literally explained by me and my friend Dinda. So if from us there is a wrong word or understanding is not clear, and we apologize and thank you. We say thank you and goodbye. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.